In the landscape of sci-fi and comic book franchises, the multiversal mattress is starting to feel a little crusty. With Marvel, DC, and even high-concept indie movies getting in on the action, it seems like multiverse stories are everywhere, and even Transformers tried its hand at one recently, though it was easy to miss. In 2022, as part of the lead-up to the franchise's 40th anniversary, the Transformers Generations toy line debuted Legacy, a 3-year romp through the Transformers multiverse that pulled characters from as many different eras and cartoons and comics as it could, and even paid homage to Transformers-adjacent properties like Zoids and the Rock Lords. But Transformers has never just been about the toys, and the characters and stories behind those toys was what allowed the franchise to survive long enough for Legacy to exist in the first place. That tradition had been continuing through the 2010s, with video games, comics, and tie-in cartoons providing context for the Generations line for years, until Legacy. The previous phase of the toy line, the War for Cybertron trilogy, was accompanied by animated shows on Netflix, and that trilogy's showrunners pitched a follow-up based on the Multiversal Legacy toy line, but Netflix passed on it, so the show never got made. And the only scraps of stories or lore the Legacy toys ever got were small tidbits that the line's designer, Mark Maher, had come up with during the toy line's development. And while the Transformers franchise is full of fleshed-out universes and expansive continuities, there are also a lot that are more like Legacy. Small glimpses of untold stories and abandoned worlds with untapped potential. So let's tap some of them. When most people think about the stories of the original generation of Transformers characters back in 1984, they probably think of the cartoon or maybe the comics. But the kids who didn't have access to those stories could still learn about the characters from the toys themselves. A long time, but now abandoned staple of Transformers was the inclusion of a biography and the vital statistics for each character printed right on the packaging. And because the toys were released before the cartoon aired in September of 1984 and even slightly ahead of the first Transformers comics in the spring, these toy bios make up the very first Transformers narrative universe. And while a lot of it is similar to what we'd see later on, there are also a few curious differences that set it apart. In this universe, Optimus Prime isn't one being, but three, a holy trinity of robot, trailer, and roller scout vehicle that are all part of a single hive mind, with injury to one being felt by the other two. This is also the universe where Prime's catchphrase, "Freedom is the right of all sentient beings," comes from. He never actually said it on screen until the 2007 live-action movie. In most continuities, Ironhide is depicted as a tough Autobot war veteran, but his tech spec card depicts him as being slow and fragile in addition to being ancient. And this kind of makes sense when you actually look at his toy, which is headless, awkwardly proportioned, and seems extremely primitive compared to other more conventionally attractive robots. Ironhide's look-alike, Ratchet, wasn't depicted as particularly lumbering, but in the toy line he was apparently an alcoholic, with his ability to disperse various fluids leading to him being less effective during surgery if he'd been having a good time. Some of the villains are also a bit different. In the cartoon, Soundwave's animal companions were depicted as being little more than beasts in contrast to the more human-like Frenzy and Rumble. But in the original toy line, all of Soundwave's minions have their own stats, personalities, and even signature quotes. Laserbeak is a coward who prefers to hunt down and pick off the stragglers after a battle, while Ravage is a master strategist who's respected by the other Decepticons and prefers to work alone despite living in another guy's chest. There's also Buzzsaw, a sophisticated and egotistic robot who viewed violence as an art form, and was barely seen in the cartoon despite being the only tape that actually came packaged with Soundwave. And while most Transformers fans could probably tell you that Starscream is second in command of the Decepticons and the leader of the Seekers, his tech specs say otherwise. Out of a possible 10, Starscream's rank is only 5, the same as Thundercracker and lower than Soundwave's cat. And it's actually the normally boorish Skywarp who seems to be the leader with a rank of 9, outranking Soundwave himself and being second only to Megatron. There are also some characters who draw attention to the limited features and articulation of their toys. The hovercraft Sea Spray, canonically, isn't a hovercraft at all, and like his toy, he has little wheels that allow him to travel on land. Fellow Minibot Warpath is useless if upended thanks to his weird tank tread monoleg. The universe of the toy line also had some unique characters that weren't found anywhere else, like the deluxe Insecticons. Due to rights issues with their toys, these guys never made it into the cartoon and only briefly showed up to die in the UK's version of the comics, so while the smaller black and purple Insecticons became an iconic part of the franchise, their larger counterparts languished in obscurity for a long time, taking decades to get new toys, and being more prominent in Family Guy than any official Transformers story. This guy, Venom, was even the leader of the entire Insecticon subgroup, though he was constantly paranoid that someone might try to usurp him. Even when characters are specifically designed for media, like with the 1986 animated movie, there are still some unique aspects to those characters that appear only in the universe of the toys. In the movie, Megatron is severely injured during his fight with Optimus Prime, but is saved by the monster planet Unicron, who upgrades him into Galvatron. To avoid spoilers, the toy line treated Galvatron as a separate character, who acts as the Decepticon city commander and plots against his allies to take the throne for himself. And did you ever wonder why the blue blur is the fastest thing alive? Well, he's descended from a racehorse. Or Springer, whose name seems kind of arbitrary in the movie, but his toy bio explains that you should imagine him having springing pogo stick legs. And while most pop culture references in Transformers tend to be coy allusions to avoid legal trouble, Springer just straight up has a lightsaber. But that's fine, because Star Wars is also a part of the Transformers multiverse. Transformers has done a lot of crossovers and collaborations over the years. Most of them are one-offs or small groups of figures created for the Transformers collaborative toy line that started in 2019, but all the way back in 2005, Hasbro launched a full line of figures that mashed up the robots in disguise with the galaxy far, far away. Though something that was kind of strange about this crossover was that it was a Transformers toy line where the Transformers didn't actually exist. In the Star Wars crossover line, there were no Autobots or Decepticons, and the giant robots were just transforming mechs built by the engineers who inhabited the Star Wars universe. But even though the actual Transformers didn't seem to exist there, the universe of the crossover toy line was still assigned an official designation as part of the Transformers multiverse. The Star Wars Transformers line was eventually expanded in 2008, rebranding as Transformers Crossovers and adding figures based on characters from Marvel Comics. These toys were also treated as piloted mech suits by the lore, this time created by Tony Stark and Reed Richards based on mysterious alien technology, which could conceivably just be the Transformers because the two franchises had actually crossed over before. Originally, the Transformers comics published by Marvel in the 80s took place within the primary Marvel Comics universe itself. Spider-Man and Nick Fury even made an appearance in the third issue, which included a footnote letting readers know where the Transformers story took place in relation to the ongoing Spider-Man comics. Eventually, the connection was dropped, though, and the Marvel Transformers comics received not one, but two different designations for themselves within the Marvel multiverse. The American comics take place on Earth 91274, while the UK version of the comics take place on Earth 120185, thanks largely to a character called Death's Head. Death's Head was initially a one-off bounty hunter character introduced in the UK Transformers comics who was well received enough to earn some more appearances throughout the book's run, even killing the Autobot Bumblebee in one of them. Bumblebee had previously died in the US comics, but it was due to an altercation with G.I. Joe in a story that wasn't printed in the UK, so due to the discrepancy with how exactly Bumblebee died and a few other differences in the stories across the pond, the US and UK Transformers comics exist in separate universes within the Marvel multiverse. As for Death's Head himself, his last appearance in a Transformers comic saw him disappearing after going through a time portal, but that wasn't the end of his story. Normally, any character created for the Transformers comic would become the property of Hasbro, but in order to prevent that from happening to Death's Head, author Simon Furman and artist Jeff Senior published a one-page story featuring the character as a backup strip in a different UK Marvel comic ahead of his Transformers appearance, anchoring the character to the wider Marvel roster rather than restricting him to Transformers. So when Death's Head entered the time hole, he took a brief detour through the world of Doctor Who before being plopped out into the Marvel Universe proper. And while Marvel never really used Death's Head in any meaningful way, he has popped up and been reinvented here and there, and maybe one day he'll show up in the MCU, ready to do battle with the GoBots? Really? If you like Digimon, the Sega Genesis, and Big Bad Beetleborgs, boy do I have the runner-up for you. Beginning in 1983, a few months before the launch of Transformers, Tonka's GoBots were an American interpretation of Bandai's Machine Robo toy line from 1982. The cartoon, The Challenge of the GoBots, beat the Transformers show to air by a little over a week, and it told the story of the residents of Gobotron, human-like aliens who became transforming cyborgs to save themselves from extinction during an ancient war. During the series, the heroic Guardians fought against the evil renegades on Earth and throughout the cosmos, and later got tangled up in a war between the Rock Lords during their own animated feature in 1986. There were probably a number of factors that contributed to the GoBots' lack of continued success compared to Transformers. For one thing, most of the GoBots toys were quite small and simple compared to the larger and more complex Transformers. The characters also didn't have quite the same impact. While Transformers were given evocative, superheroic names by Marvel Comics writers, the GoBots opted for simple names and groan-worthy puns. Rather than the Autobot commander Optimus Prime, the leader of the Guardians was called Leader 1. And unlike the apocalyptic-sounding Megatron, whose name evokes an electronic megaton bomb, the renegade GoBots were led by the evil motorcycle, Psych-Kill. The designs featured in the Hanna-Barbera cartoon also didn't help. Transformers adapted its characters to work in animation rather than being overly faithful to the somewhat clunky toys they were based on, but GoBots tried to maintain the endearing, though generally less cool, proportions of the original Machine Robo figures. But when Hasbro acquired Tonka in 1991, the GoBots came along with them, and now the GoBots exist as a part of the Transformers multiverse, with a few caveats. Because of the connection to Machine Robo, Hasbro can't actually make new toys that look like the characters they're supposed to be, because most of those designs are still owned by Bandai. They can do comics, like Tom Scioli's GoBots miniseries, which implies that the GoBots would actually end up creating the Transformers in one universe, but new toys are still a little tricky. So when a group of GoBots characters had their first release as Transformers figures, they borrowed existing G1 character designs that turned into similar vehicles and were recolored to distance themselves from Bandai's product further. Later stories would eventually explain that these GoBots were refugees from their doomed home dimension and had adopted Transformer-style bodies in order to better blend in, becoming robots in disguise. When those wayward GoBots first left their home universe, they ended up in Axiom Nexus, a multiversal crossroads home to the Transtechs, transcendent technomorphs who watch over the multiverse and harbor travelers from other universes, with stories told in fan club comics throughout the late 2000s and 2010s. But the Transtech name and the designs of the Transtech characters are actually about a decade older than that. Throughout the back half of the 90s, the Transformers landscape had been dominated by the Beast Wars, which told the stories of the animalistic Maximals and Predacons rather than the classic Autobots and Decepticons. And while the toy line and its tie-in show were both very successful, the follow-up, Beast Machines, was not. But because Transformers toys have such a long development time, often taking 2 years to actually hit shelves, Hasbro was already in the process of designing a successor to Beast Machines called Transtech, which would have arrived in the summer of 2001. Transtech would have continued the Transformers' slow march from the completely animalistic Beast Wars figures back to the classic automobile robots of Generation 1. First there were the Transmetals, which gave wings and wheels to robotic beast modes, then Beast Machines pitted the Maximals against an entire Viacon faction, and Transtech would have seen animal characters like Cheetor finally adopting full vehicle modes for the first time. The line also would have included returning characters from Generation 1, like Shockwave, Starscream, the original Optimus Prime, and even introduced a new villain, Immorticon. But even though the characters were designed and some toys even got prototypes, there was no story to go along with them. In those days, the designs started with the toys, and those designs were then handed over to the animation studio who would come up with the cartoon for those characters to inhabit. Transtech was cancelled before those designs ever left Hasbro and sat unused until the Transformers Collectors Club recycled and reinterpreted them as the Guardians of the Multiverse. And as it turns out, Transtech's original abandoned universe was actually a fitting bookend for the Beast era, whose original story has also been largely forgotten. The way the TV show told it, the Maximals and Predacons were the descendants of the Autobots and Decepticons from hundreds of years in the future, flung millions of years into the past thanks to time travel, and adopting beast modes based on prehistoric Earth's wildlife. But that wasn't how it was at first. Before the cartoon hit the air, the story of the Beast Wars was told, like it was in Generation 1, by the toys themselves. In the pack-in comic that came with the basic class Optimus Primal and Megatron, who were a bat and an alligator rather than a gorilla and a T-Rex, the Beast Warriors are the original Generation 1 characters continuing their war in the mid-1990s, reformatted with biotechnology to have organic animal alternate modes. And this modern-day version of the Beast Wars story didn't just exist in a short comic, it also carried over into the bios and tech specs of the early toys. Rat Trap scours city streets looking for Predacon enemies. Tarantulas kidnaps humans and keeps them in hordes of cocoons in his subterranean lair. And rather than taking the forms of dinosaurs based on fossils, Predacons like Megatron and Pterosaur owe their alternate modes to genetic engineering, using DNA stolen from Jurassic Park-style genetics labs. And if you look at how the Generation 1 story evolved in its latter years, this version of Beast Wars is actually a pretty logical next step. The giant fuel-guzzling robots that first came to Earth gradually added smaller, more efficient companions to their ranks like Headmasters and Target Masters, and then began adopting more organic disguises as they developed Pretender technology. And after a decade of war on Earth, it's no longer a surprise to see a car or truck stand up and start shooting, so becoming animals is a perfect way to recapture the element of disguise. Setting the Beast Wars on modern-day Earth also takes care of any potential time travel issues. You wouldn't want to accidentally create a universe where Optimus Prime doesn't exist, right? One consequence of the original Transformers lineup being cobbled together from pre-existing Japanese toy lines is that sometimes somebody else is already selling those toys. During the 1980s, a French company called Justra held the license to distribute certain toys from Takar's Diaclone and Microchange toy lines in Belgium, France, Germany, and the Netherlands. This meant that, until the specifics could be hammered out, some characters just weren't able to be sold in those countries, and the toys included a pack-in mini-comic to tell the story of this version of the Transformers. In the G1 cartoon, the Transformers' home planet of Cybertron had been drained of energy after eons of war, and the Autobots decided to leave to look for new power sources. They were chased by the Decepticons, who forcibly boarded their ship, and as the ships approached Earth, linked by their tractor beams, the planet's gravity threw the vessels off course. Autobot leader Optimus Prime tried to keep his ship steady as it careened into a mountain, crashing and remaining dormant for 4 million years. After awaking in 1984, the Autobots and Decepticons then adopted new alternate modes based on Earth's technology, and even built new Transformers to help them, like the giant Dinobots, who were based on Earth's prehistoric creatures. In Europe, the Diaclone toy that Optimus Prime was based on was one of those that Justra had the rights to, so instead, the Autobot leader is Jetfire. And he's not leading the Autobots away from Cybertron because it's out of energy, but because it's on a crash course with an asteroid belt that's going to destroy the planet. And despite specifically abandoning their homeworld to avoid being killed, Jetfire is a lot more spiteful than Optimus and simply programs his ship to crash into Earth because it'll kill the Decepticons that have boarded. But as the ship skims the surface of the planet, the Decepticon's sound wave leaps out just before it crashes. And after the impact, the ship's computer uses the last of its power to repair the least damaged Autobots and send them after Soundwave. In order to give them an edge, the ship rebuilds them with a new ability, the power to change their forms to resemble the strongest creatures on the planet, dinosaurs. So not only does this make the Dinobots the first Autobots on Earth rather than late additions, it also makes them the first Transformers. The rest of the Autobots and Decepticons aren't given the ability to transform until a volcanic eruption reactivates the ship, and it determines that the robots will need to be able to disguise themselves to survive on the unfamiliar planet. So despite some broad strokes being the same, this universe has some pretty big departures. Optimus Prime doesn't exist, which means that the entire concept of the primes as we know them probably doesn't exist either. And Cybertron isn't just dormant, it's been completely destroyed. And probably the strangest of all, the Transformers don't actually have the ability to transform until they wake up on Earth. But that's understandable given how early in the life of the franchise these stories were being told. They didn't have all the details ironed out, so modern stories are generally better managed. I hope. With every live-action Transformers movie, there's a maelstrom of marketing and tie-ins and toys, and that means there's a web of alternate histories and continuities that branch out from each movie that can sometimes go in interesting and contradictory directions. For example, in the third film, it's revealed that the Apollo 11 mission that took humanity to the moon was actually a ruse designed to hide the government's study of Transformers. But in the prequel novel for the first movie, Ghosts of Yesterday, that's already the case. It's just a different ruse. Rather than using the moon mission to investigate the crashed Autobot Ark, it's actually just a distraction, so that everyone's watching it rather than the launch of a prototype starship that was built by studying Megatron's body and the Allspark. This novel also explains how the Transformers learned Megatron and the Allspark were somewhere on Earth in the first place, when they encounter the astronauts from Earth who tell them how they built their ship. But that contradicts the prequel comics for the same movie, which say that Earth was discovered by Blackout's ability to track Megatron's energy signature. So right from the jump, nothing's consistent and every story explains things differently, and that's not even getting into the massive differences introduced by the movies themselves. But the Transformers multiverse is built to handle things exactly like this. Rather than giving every universe a strict numeric designation like Marvel or DC does, Transformers has a unique, pedantic formatting system to keep everything straight. In the Transformers multiverse, each individual timeline is referred to as a universal stream, with similar universes gathered together into universal clusters. Each universal stream is then assigned a name based on its parent cluster, the type of media, and the initial date of publication. For example, the universal cluster that represents Generation 1 is called the Primax cluster, with the cartoon taking place in a universal stream called Primax 984.17 Alpha, and the US Marvel comics taking place in Primax 984.0 Gamma. And these universes can get very granular. Individual comic book covers have been assigned unique universal stream designations if they deviate enough from what actually happens in the book. So if you think there's a continuity error between one piece of media and another that's supposed to be connected, the stories just happen to take place in slightly different universes. Or if a comic book artist uses a fan-made toy as a reference for their art, and that design makes it into an official comic or video game or packaging art or movie, that just means that there's some Transformers universe out there in the multiverse where that fan-made toy is the canonical version of the character. There's even a designation in the Transformers multiverse for our reality and others like it. And I think what this means is that the universes of the Transformers multiverse don't just extend to officially licensed material. If third-party toys and the people who make them are canon, then so are fan artists and writers and filmmakers and anyone who creates their own personal Transformers universe. The adventures you had as a kid playing with your Transformers are canon. And everything being canon is also a very helpful scapegoat for when Hasbro is trying to make things fit together that don't quite work. Hasbro's big Transformers project for the 2010s was something that fans came to call the aligned continuity. With the movies being a massive hit and Transformers becoming more of a tentpole multimedia intellectual property than just a toy line with some cartoons, it was important to try to get some consistency in what the brand actually was. Things like Beast Wars and the Unicron trilogy and the live-action movies were all telling very different stories, sometimes with very different characters using the same names. So to help them consolidate everything into a single reference point for authors to use moving forward, they created the Binder of Revelation, an internal document that told Transformers storytellers where the Transformers came from, who the major characters are, and what major events happened in their history. But the binder was never really strictly adhered to, and storytellers were free to do as they pleased as long as the broad strokes still kinda lined up. After all, it doesn't really matter that there's 3 different guys named Grimlock if one's in a show made for toddlers and another's in a video game for adults that was off the shelves before those kids were even born. And if people do want to get really pedantic about it, they can just say it happened in a different universal stream, problem solved. Except the binder was actually leaked in 2025, and for the first time, all of its contents were available to the public. And it turns out that the binder doesn't just cover the past and present of the Transformers multiverse, but its future as well. The Transformers universe depicted in the binder is one that is largely similar to the one seen in games like War for Cybertron and TV shows like Transformers Prime, but it also folds characters and events from the live-action movies into its narrative, and the modern-day story of the binder ends with the events of Age of Extinction. After that, things get a little weird. In this universe, it's revealed that Cybertron had been corrupted by Dark Energon, and Optimus Prime would eventually need to unite the artifacts of the ancient Primes to restore it. When this happens, the war between the Autobots and Decepticons ends, but the story of the Transformers continues because it turns out that the end of the war is the signal for Unicron to begin his trek across the stars to devour Cybertron. With the specter of Unicron looming over them like some vast predatory bird, the Transformers then set off on an interstellar adventure to recruit the surviving ancient Primes in the hopes that together they'll be able to defeat the all-consuming monster planet. However, while they're on this journey, they make a discovery. Unicron's arrival signals not only the end of the world, but the end of the entire universe, and the birth of a new one. Unicron's hunger, it turns out, is cyclical, and each time Unicron has been defeated, he's tried again and again in new universe after new universe until he gets it right, and can create a universe of complete chaos. Ultimately, though, Unicron is defeated by the united forces of humans, Autobots, and every other world throughout the galaxy, and once all life in the universe is aligned with a common purpose, they pick the green ending in Mass Effect 3 and all merge into a new race of ultimate Transformers, so the universe needs no more reboots. And while this is intended to be a hopeful ending for the Transformers franchise, what it's also saying is that the rest of the multiverse, all those other canon universes, everything from the cartoons to the comics to the toys to the movies, they didn't just end because it was time to refresh the brand for a new audience, or they were weird offshoots designed for a specific market that didn't need to be revisited. They ended because Unicron won. Hasbro's official internal lore says that every version of Transformers outside of the binder was a failure, and the inhabitants of those universes were collapsed into a singularity, only useful as raw material for the next attempt at making the perfect Transformers continuity. Hivemind G1 Optimus, the refugee GoBots, the entire Star Wars universe, not just abandoned, but destroyed, all because the powers that be decided that what came next might be more profitable. And the big joke of it all is that the story in the binder, the ultimate defeat of Unicron and the victory of the ultimate Transformers, never happened. That story was never told. Hasbro's expensive binder and their perfectly orderly aligned universe suffered the same fate as every other universe that came before it, and the cycle continued again and again and again. Because you can't make a perfect universe. There will always be more stories to tell, more characters to explore, someone who wants to deviate from the established lore and experiment with something new. And while the all-consuming machine might dictate how long those new universes are allowed to survive and will collapse them when they no longer can sate its hunger, the pace of creation outstrips the pace of destruction. Everything dies. Every universe eventually collapses. But as long as someone is still telling stories, even if it's you, canonically you, those universes can be born again, including, apparently, ours. Wait,